Every 4 years, billions of people worldwide tune into the Summer Olympics, and the vast appeal stretches far beyond sports. While polls show the number of people who are extremely proud to be an American is at record lows, the Olympics have a way of turning that around. During the Tokyo Games, 63% of Americans said they had a very positive reaction when they saw the Stars and Stripes. No matter where you live on the planet, the Olympics drum up profound memories. I'll still tear up to this day thinking about Muhammad Ali fighting through Parkinson's to light the cauldron at the '96 Atlanta Olympics, 36 years after he won the gold in Rome, only to throw the medal into a river after facing racism when he came home. Even as a child, I knew that was a moment. But the one that still gives me chills was watching Kerri Strug stick the landing on her vault after hurting her ankle, clinching gold for Team USA in the Magnificent Seven. Sure, we watch the Olympics to see excellence and world competition in 300 different events. It's where GOATs are born. Usain Bolt, Michael Phelps, Katie Ledecky, Simone Biles. Of course, your list of superstars will be different depending on where you live. But the Olympics also show off some of the world's greatest cities. For over 2 weeks, we get to learn about the culture and history of faraway nations. The opening ceremony in Rio resurfaced a century-old debate that Brazil's Alberto Santos Dumont was the first human to fly, not the Wright brothers. Watching events like the triathlon bring you right into the city, while the Paris opening ceremony will take place on the city's famed Seine River. It's easy to take for granted a production that miraculously beams into our homes. Well before the starter pistol fires, there's so much that goes into a city scoring the Olympics and then pulling off an event of global proportions that attracts millions of visitors. It might surprise you to hear that both cases can be rife with bribes and other shady deals. Or maybe it won't. Controversy has been a part of the Olympics since the ancient games in 776 BC. The Olympic Games were literally founded on cheating, despite the long-standing tradition of swearing an oath to Zeus to play fair. As the Greek myth goes, Pelops won his bride's hand by sabotaging her father King Oenomaus' chariot before a race. The king died in the race, and Pelops founded the Games to commemorate his victory. Stroll through the ancient Games Stadium in Olympia, the pathway is littered with what's left of the Zanes. These pedestals once supported bronze statues of Zeus, paid for by fines imposed on cheating Olympic athletes. The pedestals had the offenses inscribed to warn other athletes not to cheat. Centuries later, they still need to be warned.
New revelations about an elaborate scheme of alleged doping at the 2014 Winter Olympics.
Russia received a 4-year ban for doping from the World Anti-Doping Agency.
But it's not just athletes foiling fair play. In the modern Olympic era, misconduct can happen years before athletes even qualify for the Games.
It's a huge scandal in the U.S. It's the Olympic bribery scandal in Salt Lake City. There are allegations the city won the Winter Games for the year 2002 by bribing some members of the International Olympic Committee.
Brazilian police have arrested the head of the National Olympics Committee, Carlos Arthur Nussmann, in a new phase of the so-called unfair play investigation.
Welcome to the world of bid rigging.
You started to get real bidding corruption maybe in the 60s. It finally blew up in the bidding for the 2002 Salt Lake City Games.
Olympic historian David Walachinsky says this corruption scandal was so ridiculous, it was almost humorous. All told, the bribery scandal surrounding Salt Lake City's 2002 bid is the stuff of legend. Olympic corruption was a poorly kept secret, but Salt Lake's really the first time it all came publicly to light. Since then, the stain on the International Olympic Committee has been hard to scrub out. Okay, so here's a bit of important context. Salt Lake City tried and failed to get the Olympics 4 times before this happened. So this whole saga started after they lost out for the 4th time on the '98 Olympics to Nagano, Japan.
The city
第18回冬季オリンピック競技大会長野が開催をする栄誉を与えられました。
Salt Lake's organizing committee later learned that Japanese officials spent as much as $14 million, $32 million in today's dollars, to land the games. Little-known Nagano had reportedly given IOC officials the first-class treatment. The bid committee hosted them in ritzy digs in Tokyo, Nagano, and Kyoto. They entertained IOC members with geishas and helicopter rides. And to cover up any bribery, they burned 10 large boxes of documents, incinerating the paper trail. Instead of licking their wounds from losing out, again, Salt Lake City took notes.
the Salt Lake City people realized you had to keep a file on each IOC voting member and then, do whatever you could to get their vote. And so there was one case in particular caught my attention where there was an IOC member from Togo. Well, Togo doesn't compete in the Winter Olympics. But that didn't matter because the guy still voted. So they kept flying him out to Salt Lake City. Well, that wasn't good enough. So they had to include a stopover in Paris so his wife could go shopping on the bid committee's pocketbook. And just the whole thing was so ridiculous. But they got the games, and that was all they cared about.
Some might say Salt Lake City just played by IOC's rules. If you ain't cheating, you ain't trying. But the revelations broke bid rigging corruption wide open. In response to investigations, the IOC expelled 10 members. Meanwhile, the Justice Department brought bribery and fraud charges against the president and VP of Salt Lake City's bid committee, who both resigned years before the games came to town. The charges were dropped a year after SLC's successful run as host city. But if you think that was the end of the IOC and bid rigging corruption, let me direct you to the 2016 Rio Games. In 2021, Brazilian Olympic Committee President Carlos Arthur Nuzman was sentenced to 30 years in jail for crimes connected to buying votes. But he's still a free man after a federal court ruled the judge didn't have the legal competence to rule on the case. Does winning an Olympic bid take a Faustian bargain? Doesn't have to.
I always loved the Olympics growing up as a child. I loved to watch the Olympics. I was fascinated by that. I believed in it.
Meet Charlie Battle.
I bought into the whole bringing the world together through sport.
The Atlanta lawyer was in public finance before playing a key role in bringing the games and honor to the ATL.
We were just in the 80s beginning to get international plane service, but we called ourselves the world's next great city.
Atlanta's jockeying for the Olympics came when the mid-sized city was just a blip on the global map.
Truth be known, when we started this, people wondered if we were going to have blackjack because they thought maybe they got us confused with Atlantic City, New Jersey.
But before organizers could start lobbying IOC members, Atlanta needed to win the USA crown. After beating out San Francisco, Nashville, and Minneapolis came the unenviable task of raising money to challenge international bids.
The government doesn't support an Olympics in this country. There are a lot of constitutional provisions that prevent cities and counties from pledging money. We couldn't start building our stadium until we had a TV contract in hand. It was a bankable contract. And then when we won the U.S. designation, we were able to get some, corporate support, and we kind of kept on keeping on.
The plan went down as smooth as ice-cold Coca-Cola in the hot Atlanta summer. The Atlanta-based beverage behemoth put up tens of millions at least to bring the games to their home turf, though they'd long been an Olympic sponsor. Atlanta's Olympic promise was a privately funded affair. But Battle says they didn't just have to sell sponsorships, they had to sell the IOC on the city.
There were 88 international members. We had to meet them, try to get them to come to Atlanta, go to see them. And basically, I ended up just on the road for the next couple of years.
And who needs bribery when you have Charlie Battle in your corner? He says he won the IOC over with good old-fashioned Southern hospitality.
That's why I went on the road so much, is to go visit people, visit them in their homes, get to know their families, try to get them to come to Atlanta, show them that we were the people they could trust. It's a marketing deal in the end, but from our perspective, making friends was the key.
The International Olympic Committee has awarded the 1996 Olympic Games to the city of Atlanta.
The city exploded in victory when the games were announced in 1990. Battle was quoted on the front page of the Atlantic Journal saying he was stunned, excited, elated, shell-shocked. 6 years later, the host city was celebrating a wildly successful start to the games when fear struck. A bomb detonated at Atlanta's Centennial Olympic Park, killing one woman and injuring more than 100 others. Security guard Richard Jewell was initially hailed a hero for discovering the suspicious backpack and moving Olympic fans out of harm's way. The bombing could have been much more destructive. But within days, Jewell was wrongfully targeted as the prime suspect. It took years to catch the real bomber, Eric Rudolph, whom police arrested in 2003. And Clint Eastwood captured Jewell's part of the story in the 2019 movie Richard Jewell.
Move away from the camera! always look at the guy who found the bomb, just like you always look at the guy who found the body.
Where was I again? Outside of the tragedy and the traffic and the heat, the 96 Games was mostly seen as a success. But in 2013, when the U.S. Olympic Committee asked cities to put their names in the ring for the 2024 Games, former Atlanta Mayor Andrew Young, who co-led Atlanta's 96 bid efforts, said the city shouldn't go for it. Plain and simple, he said, "I don't feel like going through it again, and I don't imagine anyone from 96 will. It's a 10-year commitment." But he did say hosting the Olympics is good for any city. Battle says Atlanta especially benefited greatly from the Games.
Without question, absolutely, yes. There are always people who say, well, we shouldn't spend this money. We ought to spend it on something else. And there's no doubt about that, we should. But that isn't the way the world works. Just because we wouldn't have had this money, what we raised, they weren't going to raise to revitalize, something else or help build housing or this, that, and the other.
Battle says winning the Olympic bid turned the wheels on downtown development.
We built a downtown park in Atlanta called Centennial Olympic Park, which was on nobody's radar at the time we started, but ended up being really the best legacy of our games.
In the 3 decades following the Games, Atlanta's population doubled, and the Olympics helped solidify the ATL as a premier sporting event destination. They've since hosted 2 Super Bowls, multiple Final Fours, and the College Football National Championship.
We were fortunate to get this, and it had a tremendously positive impact.
But not every host city scores gold. With the Olympics, budgets seem to be more of a false promise. From 1960 to 2016, Summer Games went over budget by an average of 213%. The 2008 Beijing Games supposedly went over just 2%, but they also budgeted higher than average, and you can insert your own snide comment on government control over economic data. The 1976 Montreal Games had the biggest busted budget, exceeding it by 720%. For the Winter Olympics, the average overrun is 142%, with the 1980 Lake Placid Games going 324% over budget. And not everyone's fit to foot the bill.
The only reason Greece was able to put on the Games was the EU, but they borrowed too much money and went into financial because they built all kind of monuments that they didn't need.
Abandoned, state-of-the-art facilities often become an eyesore on Olympic legacies and city spending.
They build way too much stuff, and they build stuff they don't need, and they waste a lot of money. And one of the things we always were proud of is that we really didn't do that.
In Atlanta, the track and field stadium transformed into Turner Field in less than a year, home of the MLB's Atlanta Braves for 2 decades. Over budget and overdeveloped are just 2 reputational hazards the IOC is trying to overhaul.
Now it's not as bad as it was because what the IOC has done is they've introduced a system where you have to, in advance, before you even are allowed to bid, you have to meet a certain criteria of where you're going to get the money, what the venue's going to be built, the environmental aspects, sustainability.
But what about when the corruption comes in after the city wins the bid?
While Sochi is better known for its palm trees than its snow, there is a blizzard of allegations of unsavory ties to organized crime figures, official corruption.
They're already the most unlikely and perhaps the most controversial games ever. They're certainly the most expensive.
I can always count on Russia to help me make a point. Enter the 2014 Games in Sochi, a $55 billion affair.
This was totally corrupt. Vladimir Putin gave 27 contracts to a friend of his.
Well, isn't that nice? Bloomberg describes Arkady Rotenberg as the boyhood friend and former judo partner of black belt President Vladimir Putin. Bloomberg counts at least 21 contracts worth more than $7 billion, which, by the way, is more than some entire Olympic budgets. The contracts ranged from a share of the transportation system linking Sochi to ski resorts, a highway along the Black Sea, and a $387 million media center. Now, I've been to quite a few media centers in my day. Can't say I've ever felt like someone spent hundreds of millions of dollars on it. I sure hope the spread was good. Well, after the fact, Putin also quietly handed out medals to his billionaire friends who invested in the Games.
When there's money, there's corruption.
And let's be very clear, there is a ton of money involved in the Olympics.
There have been a series of scandals and controversies from the moment, actually, that Tokyo won the bid for the Summer Games.
Japan's Fair Trade Commission has filed criminal complaints against the big advertising company Dentsu and 5 other ad firms over alleged bid rigging on contracts for the Tokyo 2020 Olympics.
There were bribes, TV rights bribes, all sorts of bribes, which sponsor would get the rights to this or that.
Advertising giant Dentsu, 5 other companies, and 7 individuals are charged with colluding and assigning contracts for the Tokyo Games.
Afterwards, it's really corrupt.
But Tokyo is what we call a 1-2 punch, because the committee also faced allegations of bribing IOC members to win the games in the first place. While Tokyo's corruption scandal still plays out in courts, Paris is piling on before the games even begin. Officials raided organizers' offices back in October. A judicial source told Reuters the raid is part of an investigation into alleged favoritism for several awarded contracts. While heads rolled over international bid rigging corruption, the IOC has less control over what happens after bids are awarded. Paris will be the first games held under the IOC's new anti-corruption clause.
What we've seen now is a real change because the IOC under Thomas Bach, who's the president of the IOC, they realized this is not good. We can't have another Sochi situation. We can't have another Rio situation. So when they got really good bids for the 2024 Summer Olympics from both Paris and Los Angeles, they went, wait a minute, let's not pit these people against each other, let's give them each an Olympics.
Now, instead of a drawn-out bidding process for each Summer and Winter Olympics, one that has historically lent itself to corruption, 2 IOC panels are permanently open to talks with any cities open to hosting. And these panels can also make the first move and approach cities they think might be the right fit. They've even floated rotating sites, though it's not a really popular proposal. But cities that have successfully hosted could get multiple chances.
Salt Lake City's going to get the Winter Olympics again, but in a more honest way.
Salt Lake's path to 2002 might have been burned by bribery and budget overages, but the city did a 180 when Mitt Romney took the reins. Yes, that Mitt Romney. The 2002 Winter Games turned a profit when all was said and done and turned Romney into the household name you know today. After snubbing him in '94, Massachusetts voters elected him to be their governor in 2002, and the rest is history. And though the Salt Lake City scandal forever tarnished IOC's history, it's now the frontrunner for the 2034 Games. But back to this decade. Aside from ongoing investigations into Paris Olympic organizers, Woloczynski, who splits his time between the south of France and the U.S., says there are other things to watch.
There have been some terrible terrorist attacks in France. They've come up with this opening ceremony, which is going to be in public with hundreds of thousands of people.
It's an Olympic first, an opening ceremony outside of a stadium. The Paris pomp and circumstance will take place along the Seine. And while it will make for an amazing spectacle, security is top of mind.
The challenge that the French are facing is not just protecting the Olympic venues, but the entire city and to a certain extent the rest of the country as well, all at the same time.
It's a risk the city hopes will pay off with the entire world watching. Then again, anything you do while hosting the Olympics brings that global scrutiny.
I always tell people from host cities, everybody's going to criticize you before the games because as members of the media, if we say, oh, this is going really well, nobody's going to follow that. They don't want to read that. It's not click friendly. And so you're always looking for something that's wrong. And, that's going to be the story. And then when the competition starts, everybody forgets about that, unless it's really serious.
And that's generally the case. While the bombing in Atlanta Centennial Park shook the city, we still remember the Magnificent Seven taking home the gold, or Michael Johnson breaking the 200-meter world record that stood until Usain Bolt burst onto the scene. And that's why people like Charlie Battle still believe in the Games, despite its flaws.
I think it's important. I still believe in, hopefully, that good athletic competition and good athletic stories can be inspirational to young people.
Hey, you're still here. Thanks for watching. If you like this story, you're going to love the SAN app. Download it now for unbiased, straight facts.